Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual professional development opportunity by the Maine Department of Education. My name is Joe Schmidt. I'm the Social Studies Specialist. I am happy and very excited this morning to welcome Melissa Starkey, the Social Studies Specialist from the Arkansas Department of Education. She is going to talk to us today about object-based learning. This is an initiative that Melissa is working in Arkansas to roll out as kind of a statewide learning piece. And she's going to walk you through working with students in terms of looking at objects and using it as part of your kind of curriculum and learning experiences with your students. So without any further ado, I'm happy to turn it over to Melissa Starkey, my colleague in Arkansas.
Thank you. And so you said all the things. My name is Melissa. And as I said earlier, just in case anyone missed it, I do have 2 dogs, and if they bark, I do apologize. But sometimes the mail comes early and we all have to know. And there we go. So I'm going to give you a second to make sure that you have this link to the Google Doc, because I'm going to use some handouts throughout our session here, and instead of having Joe frantically put them in the chat, I figured it would be easier if we had the Google Doc that, you know, according to these slides, this is what handout we're on. And plus, sometimes when you're looking at slides and we're looking at photos or maps, sometimes we need those a little bit bigger, because if not, you get that awkward, like I'm trying to get closer to the computer thing going on. So I've put some of the documents in there so you can get a closer look. So I'm gonna give you a second to make sure you've copied, pasted that, make sure you have it. And then I also put it in the chat with that longer link. Okay, is that enough time? Are we good? All right. So in Arkansas, we talk a lot about object-based learning because we've got this thing called the Arkansas Declaration of Learning. And object-based learning is something that is a little bit misleading at first, because when you think of object-based learning, you think, oh, well, I'm going to take objects and we're going to learn from actual objects in the classroom. You know, it has to be something tangible, right? But it doesn't. It can be, as you see in that photo, a photo. There are museums and different institutions that have electronic versions of their objects on file that you can print and have students interact with up close and have that same kind of opportunity. And instead of just like a one and done experience for students, our Declaration of Learning program is more so something that we're working with teachers to integrate into their curriculum throughout the year. And we want that experience to ultimately lead to civic engagement. So it's more of a process rather than a one-time deal. And so in Arkansas, we've developed this program. We're in our 6th year, and we work with teachers in the summer. We're not going to do it this summer, obviously, but we're really excited to hopefully do it next summer, and we spend a week with them. We offer support throughout the year to build these lessons. It's a really exciting opportunity that we have. So this is kind of where I got this passion for object-based learning. Usually when we have a workshop with teachers, we start with this activity that every object tells a story. Obviously you saw, you know, this could obviously tell a story. But my colleague Cassandra starts with this one, and it's one of my favorites. So it's an object. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but what do you think it is? What do you think it's used for? Also, as a random question, Joe, it says that someone's in the waiting room. Do you take care of that?
Got him. Yep.
Okay.
I know what it is because I have one.
That makes me so glad.
I know. Now I know what to do with mine. Whatever it is you're doing next, I'm copying.
Yeah.
I think it might be a butter press.
And you are correct. And some of the things I've seen, like that pestle and mortar, I've heard that before. a tool used to make a design on cookies, it sure could be used that way. That's how I would personally use it, because I can't say that I've made butter. But this is a really neat thing that's been passed down in Cassandra's family, and that's a picture of her grandmother right there. And when she tells this as a story, back during the Depression, her grandmother lived in the South, and as trains would go through, you'd have people jumping trains, you know, trying to go from town to town. And as they came through, her grandmother made sandwiches to feed the people that needed it, and made sure that, you know, she could help her fellow man. And so that's kind of how the butter mold turns into that story of helping, turns into that civic engagement of what can we do with what we have to help others? What can we do with what we learned to help others? And so that's really how we get excited about civic engagement, is starting with that hook. You know, what do you think it is? And then using that to launch ourselves into a lesson and ultimately civic engagement. So I'm going to share with you a definition of civic engagement, and I want you to either share out verbally or in the chat box as to what words or phrases in this definition most resonate with you. So what words or phrases most resonate with you? I see moral, member of a larger social fabric, recognize and take action, fault, take action when appropriate. Yeah. Responsible. And with all these words I'm seeing pop up in the phrases, aren't these things that we want for our students? Isn't this kind of the purpose of what we do, to make and create morally and civically responsible individuals that can make informed moral and civic judgment? Isn't that what we want? So that's really kind of at the heart of object-based learning. So we're going to go through some exercises where we more closely read objects and paintings and maps, and we're going to kind of circle through back to the ideas of civic engagement kind of throughout our process today. So let's start with how to read a painting. So either out loud or in the chat box again, I'm showing you this one. I want to know, what do you see? What do you think? And what do you wonder? And if you've seen this before, pretend you haven't.
Well, it looks like a whole bunch of different statues that are important, like the pharaoh, and looks like some from like Egyptian type statues that they may have taken the heads off.
I agree. I agree with the 4-year-old that says faces and heads. There are so many faces and heads. And what does that make you wonder? Do you wonder whose faces and heads those are? Yeah, like you can see that it's leaders of countries. Like, are we looking at like fallen civilizations? If we kind of zoom back, does it kind of look like a mountain there in the landscape? Oh, the face is in pain. Ooh. Yeah, and you just want to know why, like what's happening here. So this is actually called the landscape. And this box in the lower right-hand corner, and I linked it in that bit.ly as well, gives you a little bit of background on this. We're going to call it a painting, but technically he did something with photographs and it was really cool. but this is called The Landscape. And this painting is important. We're going to call it a painting. It's important because it can take you to a discussion on issues in the classroom. It can be a launch into a unit, maybe in the beginning of the school year. Why do we study history?
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's look at this. Why do we study history? Or if you want to get even deeper, who do we memorialize? Why are these monuments broken down while others are still standing? I like what the little handout says about it, because it reminds us that it's not a mountain, it's a bunch of crumbled sculptures. And you're gonna see, like y'all noticed, you see the Sphinx, Constantine, George Washington, Stalin, Hitler, Lenin, Augustus, Julius Caesar, pharaohs, Mayan kings, and others. They've been put in a discarded heap in a barren landscape. And the message is kind of contradictory. Leaders' legacies are preserved through art, but whose legacies will escape the dustbin of history? So it's a wonderful way to just dig into inquiry, but to lead to other learning. And we just did that with a discussion. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? You can take this one step further if you'd like to do it as more of a graphic organizer. The link that you got earlier has the links to this worksheet, which comes in both a novice and a secondary level worksheet to help you for scaffolding if you want to be able to have them write down their answers and, you know, come back to it and reflect upon it. Yes, I see Elizabeth saying that she'd love to use this for an introduction to a world history course. I taught world history for 10 years and I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't know this. That pretty much summarizes me in this job as a whole. I'm learning so much that I wish I could have used in the classroom. Absolutely. But in addition to the See, Think, Wonder, I'm sure you're familiar with the worksheets that we've got free to us at the National Archives, which I've also linked those in the Google Doc as well. They're wonderful because they too are available in a novice and secondary level. And, you know, even in your secondary years, if your students aren't used to this kind of analysis of an object, because let's be honest, even my students, if I were to do something like this, they think that history, we're just studying words. We're supposed to be just watch videos and study words. And we can get just as much out of studying a painting or a map and reading those closely and teaching them the skills to read those closely as we do with words. And that can really help us reach some of our other learners that may have different skills. We can really tap into that. But if you're new to this, you can use the novice worksheet for your secondary students. This example is a novice worksheet, and it kind of helps them put things into focus. We can be able to, you know, teach them to analyze these things like we would text and get them to be that critical thinker that we'd want them to be. So to brag a little bit more on the National Archives, they've got a ton of document analysis worksheets. And they also have that docsteach.org, which gives you those free lessons with linked resources and background information. The work is done for you. It's wonderful. It's a blessing. Okay, it is. But I'm in love with this National Archive stuff. I know that the Library of Congress has things too, but I'm just really appreciating how they lay it out for those of us that may be new to object-based learning. They walk you through the steps, and then they give you the documents for everything: photographs, written work, artifacts and objects, posters, maps, cartoons, like political cartoons, videos, sound recordings. So you could have it for your oral histories. You could have it for music, because we can learn about things through music. I really loved, like, the Battle of New Orleans was always fun to teach when I taught Louisiana history that one time. Even though I'm from Arkansas, it was a very confusing time for the children. They learned how to say woo pig suey. And then artwork. So there is something for everything, and it's already scaffolded for us, which is really helpful during this time. All of these institutions too, like the Library of Congress, Stocks Teach, SHEG, they've already got collections of digitized objects and resources that we can use for this type of lesson. So it's out there for us. It's a blessing. So something else we do in our Declaration of Learning program when we're talking about how to read an object is reading a painting. So we're going to go through this activity, and we're going to use the artifact sheet for it, because it's a little bit, it's an object. So we're going to use that. I don't know why my notes say I'm going to read a painting. But anyway, this is what we're going to analyze. So if you'd like to use those worksheets, I've also linked this photo in the Google Doc if you need to see it more zoomed in. But I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and I want you to use one of those worksheets, whether it be elementary or secondary, or novice or secondary, to kind of answer some of those questions. And then we're going to share out either out loud or in the chat boxes to some of the answers we got on our worksheet. I'll give you one more minute. And Joe, if you get the opportunity to put the bit.ly link in there again for the handouts, so that new people can see the handouts that we're working from, that'd be awesome. Okay, so what materials are we seeing here? Or do we think we're seeing here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see fans, we see toys. Kind of giving me a flashback to the fact that I hate Jack in the Boxes. I don't like that kind of surprise. Knitted materials, carousel. Yeah, crochet. And you do see body parts. when we're looking at it, I'm going to kind of skip through some of the worksheet, but if you were describing it like you're explaining it to someone, what do you think you're seeing here? Person with designs and objects. Could be photoshopped. Where or when is it from, or who do you think used it? Ooh, I like that, social commentary. And yeah, like you see things that could fill you with joy, just like bursting out. Yeah, kind of makes you think of someone's childhood. What other documents or historical evidence do you think you need to be able to understand the artifact here? Oh wait, Winnie the Pooh's on there? Oh he is, look at him. Yeah, you definitely want to know that background sourcing information. You want to know who the author is. You want to know the time period, which when we're talking about sourcing, isn't that the same thing we do with written objects? We're teaching students the same skills, even with the study of our objects. And so this, to give you a little bit of background information, is called the sound suit. It's down here, it gives us a little more information. It is created by Nick Cave. It is on display at the Crystal Ridges Museum of American Art because we're fancy in Arkansas and we have a museum of art. And it is actually something that you can wear. And he has made several of these actually. This particular one was created after the Rodney King incident. And so he built this to kind of talk about that, to be that commentary that someone had mentioned earlier. It essentially functions, as he says, as a second skin. It camouflages the identity of the wearer, erasing societal indicators such as race, class, and gender. It forces viewers to experience it without judgment or prejudice. And once you see that, and once you figure that out, and also later, I've put a link from YouTube of one of the sound suits being worn, and you can Google sound suits Nick Cave on YouTube and see them. But it kind of opens up that conversation. So let's talk about that. What kind of civic engagement could come from the study of this object? Like what lessons could you go into that lead to civic engagement? Where would you take this? Give you time to share out, whether it be out loud or in the chat box. I'm not sure if it's the musician.
Well, I think partly of what you read from him about why was he creating this and what were his goals, and what was going on socially. Like you said, it was I forget what you said. Which person was it? Rodney King? Mm-hmm. That he wrote it, that he created this in response to. So setting it in that context changes it sort of from something that we're speculating about to something that on the artist's part had some intentionality behind it.
Yeah.
And it makes you look at it again and see it in a different way, to have some kind of background or context for it.
It really does. Doesn't it kind of make you do like a 180? Because when you first see it all colorful and fun, but now it comes at you, and are they trying to hide under all of that? Or is it that this is all the noise that crowds them? It turns into a totally different conversation.
It makes it almost feel like you're focusing on the things that matter less, and the person is behind those things, but you can't really make the person out.
Which in a classroom for students, it gets deep, and it gets deep really quick. And this is real art based on real circumstances, and it can motivate them. And we're going to talk about some examples of how students were motivated a little bit later on with some specific pieces of art. But you know what? There's more that we can do with close reading of primary sources. I don't know how many of you miss hearing Billy Mays here, but there he was. So the map is in the Google Doc, as well as the map worksheets that we can read. Let's take a couple of minutes to analyze this map.
Ah, I see what it is.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see just like this. Right now, it just looks gorgeous, but with those links, you can zoom in a little bit more and get an idea of what it's actually about.
What is the key? Is there like a title for what the colors are showing us? Are they showing us like depth or sediments? Or it's a river. But can you just tell us what the key title is? Is there one?
Yeah, let me zoom in on it. Over here. I'll do it here.
Oh, okay.
So we are looking at the Mississippi River meander belt in all of its courses that it's taken. And and the colors are going to tell us kind of the stages of flooding and like where it's gone and when these things happened. And so this one is a little bit more difficult for sure, but it's also just a really pretty map.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But it helps us to think about, you know, what can we learn from this map? Well, obviously, has the Mississippi River always been in one place? No. Like the changing course of the major river over time. Yes. And I think it even, there's somewhere it shows you when it goes backwards. And this one is just for the Mississippi River. But you could use that to launch into a lesson on any of the great floods. You wonder when it was made. Let's see if it tells us this one on here. 44. So it kind of makes you think what was going on that they needed that commission to create that map.
There's a lot of interesting vocabulary in here too, like alluvial, valley, geological, like it connects. Seems like students might really want to know what some of those words mean.
And it would give them a purpose for studying it, which we always hear educators talk about, well, what's the why? We need to know the why we're studying it.
Yeah.
And I found more often that when we base it in an object and we study something more concrete like this map or that sound suit, and we tie it to an issue, it gives them more of a reason to be engaged. Yeah, maybe they use that data for newspaper or journals or comparing it to a more current example, especially since, at least here in the South and in Arkansas, those floods last year, there are campgrounds still closed. And as you can tell, the dog is very upset about it. She has feelings about the Toad Suck campground being closed. That's a real thing, by the way.
Also, when you look at maps like this and the river, you see how many like states are connected and maybe towns. And it helps, I think, kids to look at a map like this instead of just for memorizing where states are. They actually, that's part of the analysis, is what states are you seeing?
Yeah.
Where's it connecting?
And someone said they could use this for pieces of westward expansion. Definitely, because what issues would they face if they want to live close to that? Well, there's parts of the country that are now underwater that used to be not underwater.
Yeah,
That's a problem. That's a problem they could face. Definitely.
and travel too. I mean, when you're talking about westward expansion, it's pretty obvious that the river would be a great way to get around back then.
Definitely. Oh, and I love that when you use it to teach about erosion and oxbow lakes and physical geography. Yes, I mean, that's pretty much a summation of Arkansas history right there. It's where we get quite a few of our lakes, actually. And climate change. And then the time that there was, I believe in 1811 or 1812, the New Madrid earthquake that made the river go backwards for a little bit.
Oh.
That was the thing. That was a thing I was actually just making a project on. But yeah. All right. Another strategy that we have, I'm sure that you've tried, quadrants. Whenever you take an image and instead of just giving it to them all at once, you divide it into 4 and you ask them some guiding questions for each. What do you think is going on in this image? What is the time and place? What do you wonder about? How does it relate to our essential question? I liked to give students these little kind of picture frame cutouts to have them zoom in. That really kind of helped my learners that are kind of like myself. This kind of activity just doesn't work with me. I need to see it all at once. I need to know what I'm looking at. But there are others that this is really good for. So we're going to try it. I'm going to give you the essential question, which is, what power do words have? And we're going to look at this quadrant by quadrant. And I'm going to ask you a couple questions each time. So what do you think's going on here? An important announcement. Yeah, reading a proclamation. It looks like they're definitely at the post office because there is a sign.
Yeah.
So what time do you think that we're in here, given what we see? Could be 1800s, maybe around the time of the Civil War. Okay. So So now we've got a little bit more. Are you changing anything that you said?
Oh, I have to get us off there. Wait a sec.
A hotel, or maybe this is pointing to the post office somewhere. It does seem to be shocking.
I haven't seen this image before, but I'm waiting for it to be the news of Lincoln's assassination. I don't know why. I think it's what they're wearing.
Yeah. And notice that it's one person reading a newspaper. You kind of wonder, like, why is it one person reading a newspaper? Do the other people not have newspapers? You kind of wonder what's going on. And it kind of makes you wonder, tying it back to what power do words have? What is he reading? Yeah, why is that guy waving his hat? Okay. Are any of your ideas changing here? Other than the fact that those are some really great pants. Like, I'm pretty sure those have come back in style. I've seen those. Yeah. Yeah, what does that person have in his hand?
Yeah.
It does kind of look like a cigarette. Yeah, are we talking about prohibition here? And then the last one, we can see the whole thing now. Does that change it? What else are you wondering here?
I'm wondering if he's reading it for the Black man sitting on the stairs who maybe is illiterate.
Could be. I'm definitely seeing, let's see, there's a clothing disparity in color. But it's also slightly patriotic too, because we've got red, white, and blue.
Oh, interesting.
And then we've got this lone woman back here.
Yeah.
You know, why has she got to be so far away? Mm-hmm. You start to notice who's in the crowd. So this is actually called War News from Mexico.
Ah.
And I believe in that document, when it talks in the Google Doc I gave y'all, when it has the objects and artifacts, this is one of the images in that file, and then it's got all of its background information. So this is a little bit later, but it also helps to open up that larger conversation of what power do words have. But it also can get you talking about social issues during this time. We're talking about not just manifest destiny, but just America wanting to be an imperialist power. Like, what impact does that have on others? And what can we learn about that from this photo? So that's a really cool one to start with. So let's reflect for a second. What are some ways that you can think to use not only this last painting, but these activities and tools in your classroom. And do you know of other places where we can find objects and resources to use in the classroom like this? I know I mentioned Library of Congress and SHEG, but what do y'all have specific to y'all in Maine, other than wonderful Stephen King novels? I mean, do y'all just love him?
No, he's a great
really?
writer.
Is that kind of like the equivalent that I have to love Bill Clinton?
Oh, maybe. I have used some of those, the National Archives documents with maps and with objects and with deeds and inventories that we borrow from the Old Berwick Historical Society when we study our local Southern Maine history in the 1600s. And I like them because they sort of train us all, not just kids, but teachers too, in like the process of analysis and of getting curious about something and looking at it with new eyes and with questions. So I got some new ideas from you that will build on some of what we already do, but the museum for us is a really good resource for all kinds of things, old and new, not just ancient things, but interesting current things too.
And just the fact that you can have students bring their own photographs or pictures
Mm-hmm.
or objects. Because if it's important to them, it obviously has a story.
Mm-hmm.
And that can really engage them to well, that's why we study history. It's a story. What can we learn from this story? So Joe, how much time do I have left?
You do not have a hard stop right at 11. So if you have to go over, I'm okay with that. You might have other people who are having to leave because they have something scheduled at 11. My next one is 11:30 with Georgia DOE. So.
Okay. Ooh, that'll be a really great Southern accent. Yeah, that'll be a good one.
Melissa, I wanted to just add in, I think it's kind of cool when kids ask questions and have thoughts and there may not be a right answer. They just keep building the information so that they have more knowledge to work from. But I love the idea that, I think you said back there something about, like a genuine question that they really want to find an answer to.
And
Very
I've
organic.
seen, especially with elementary, whenever they start this process, they'll keep up, some chart paper, and the students will pose their questions. And then during their free time, sometimes students will go revisit those questions that they have and research to find the answers and then record their answers to see and be able to track what they learned throughout. That way it's not just we only did it on this one day, but it's more open for them to be able to do that inquiry on their own and to really promote the idea that they can. It doesn't have to always be teacher-led. And I really liked that idea. I think it would be applicable to high school too. Oh, I really like that idea of putting together the archive designed by students about the quarantine. Because this is primary source now. Yeah, absolutely. Using paintings or pictures to introduce topics and having students brainstorm answers in groups, having groups compare answers. I love it. One of our favorite things to do in our Declaration of Learning program is a lot of these, the art that you've seen today, we print and then I laminate with my laminator that I used to have in the classroom. And it just, gives something in their hands. There's a little bit of a difference in having that tangible object and seeing it on a screen. And they can interact with it a little bit more closely. It makes it a little more real. And so, being able to do group activities like that are really engaging.
We give the kids magnifying lenses and no matter how old just elementary, middle school, but still, as soon as they get a lens in their hand, they're right there over the map or the art or whatever, trying to see more of the details. And ask questions.
Yep. Even though high school students would never admit it because it's not cool, they really like those kinds of activities when you kind of take it back and like, today we're going to be archaeologists and we're going to try to figure this out. And they're like, lame, but they really like it. They really do. They're just
Yeah,
going to tell you.
I noticed that high school students just absolutely love drawing with markers and whatnot, like regardless of the age. With these, would it be okay even just from a creative thing of giving them an object or a painting where there really isn't any backstory at all and they just have to kind of create one for it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, isn't that what archaeology is sometimes?
Yeah.
And then you've got that conversation of, well, how did you create that meaning? Where did you get the information to come up with this? And then apply that to how do we make meaning now? It'd be very deep. It would be wonderful. You should totally do that.
Yeah.
But let's take it one step further and look at some civic engagement. And Joe, I hope you're saving the chat because there's some really good ideas on here that they can definitely use. So civic engagement, we've talked about it a little bit throughout, but that close study of art and objects provides that deeper learning for students and wonderful opportunities for civic engagement, because when we tie learning to objects, it is more likely to stick in their mind, which with these definitions of civic engagement, it helps students because it deepens their understanding of skills. It allows them to apply their learning, which is something that they need to be able to do, especially now in the pandemic. It kind of raises the question, how are they taking what they've learned and what they see and making a difference in the lives of others? Have y'all seen any examples of that?
Melissa, can you ask that question again?
I can. So
Please.
because I kind of blanked too, it's okay. So if we want our students to work to make a difference in their communities, we want them to be civically engaged, we want them to apply their learning. The question was basically, have you seen this already taking place with the pandemic? For example, I've got former students that saw the need for mask making, and they learned to sew and they've made masks. So it's just kind of like a tie to civic engagement now with the pandemic.
We've had a lot of students who wanted to have an in-person graduation and put forth a pretty good fight to make that happen. So I think if they had stayed quiet, that wouldn't have happened. And instead they used their civic action, and now we're having them. Hopefully that works out.
Yeah, like they see what's happening and they want to do something about it. Would it also correspond to civil disobedience?
Sure.
Can you expand on that?
I don't think ours have, because it's been in they've been using Twitter and emailing and things like that to kind of ask for it. We, at least in our area, haven't seen students like protesting, which I have seen some on the news where they've had some stand-ins or something, where maybe it does become a little bit more of a civil disobedience. But so far it's just really been a kind of freedom of speech kind of thing.
I've been really proud to see former students kind of pushing the importance of mask wearing and kind of talking about why it's not an oppression of their freedoms. In that conversation with some of the fun people in Arkansas who think fun things, and, you know, other constitutional ideas that aren't necessarily constitutional, you know, those little challenges that you have. And I've seen them, you know, fighting that battle on Facebook, trying to educate. And I see that kind of as a civic engagement on their part. And it just makes me so happy that maybe they learned something in high school. They've asked you about freedom of movement. Yes, I've had questions from former students too about what does this mean? What do we need to do? Yeah. And I think eventually when if it's appropriate to compare it to different responses, can we compare it to 1918? Can we talk about what ways could we be better prepared for the future? Like, what could we do as citizens to make a difference? Absolutely. But it all ties back to that idea that tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. And we really get to that with object-based learning. And as an example, one of our teachers in the Declaration of Learning program in Canada used this piece called We the People from Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. She's a library media specialist and had 7th graders work on a unit that she titled, What Does It Mean to Matter? How Culture, Time, and Place Influence the Development of Value and Identity. So this We the People piece was a hook that started her unit, and then she had them close reading several primary sources, objects, and paintings in order to answer that essential question of basically, what does it mean to matter? And in our ADOL program, teachers have access to all of these digital materials, which you will have a folder to look at on that Google Doc too, so you can kind of see what they get to look at. But what's really interesting about this piece is that each of those holes, to make that word, has one shoestring in it. And each shoestring is in a very specific hole. It's meant to be in that hole. This also has a white background. And whenever you transition it to the white background, you have to remove each shoestring and put it in its correct corresponding hole in the other background. So as in We the People, we make up the whole, it also it gives you that idea of we've got individuals making up that whole. And that was a really big deal because in her project, the students decided to make this, which is a community art installment. They wanted to make something that represented the community and give honor to their history. It's an ongoing project with an open invitation to residents to come paint, to represent themselves. They invited other schools to come paint and represent themselves. It's in a public park. And what they were thinking was, like the individual shoestrings on We the People, each of these blocks is one piece of the puzzle that represents the whole. So in their town of Paris, which is very, very small, they wanted to highlight the individuals that make up their community. And that was an entirely student-led project. So that was kind of neat that they took something and they wanted to find a way to have that impact in their community. Similarly, Jessica Brown, a teacher at Parker's Chapel in El Dorado, had her students study the Anne Frank tree because Arkansas has 2, actually. And students learned about the Japanese American internment camps at Jerome and Rower. And they were absolutely amazed because there are several Arkansans that still don't know that we had Japanese American internment camps. And they are very close to where Jessica's students were. And so they went beyond their unit of study, which was basically World War II. And they worked with the Central Arkansas Library System's Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, which it's all of those words, is its title, to do more research and find information. And these students created a script. They research, they created this video, they produced this video, and then they showed it in the community to educate others. And it's also on YouTube. And they did that outside of class to educate others. So it was really impressive how they took something and they made a change in their community because of the Anne Frank tree, which is outside of the Clinton Library. We've got another one at Little Rock Central, but it's in a safe place because I don't think it's big enough yet. So let's take some of these ideas and talk about it one more time. How could you use some of these ideas in a unit or lesson involving civic engagement? How could you take object-based learning and turn it to civic engagement?
That idea of educating the community, sharing what they've learned, and especially if they're looking at an object or a piece of art, then they can either present an object or piece of art, or they could create an object or piece of art that somehow expresses what they want to teach someone else or to help someone else think about. I haven't done this as much in social studies, but with science, we have a conservation area where kids can teach the public about what they've learned about the environment. And they really like to do that and share their work that way. And I can see this same sort of thing as you said that they were doing with the Japanese internment camp. Whatever parts of our history might be hard to look at or to talk about or just not very much known. Sometimes I think when kids find out something that not everybody else knows, then they're eager to share that knowledge. And it could be something through that we have, our kids have done videos for the Historical Society, like about people who lived in our town, kids. We had a young Black girl growing up in our mostly white town, and she became a singer, and her house is still here. And so they made a video about her. They made a video about the Great Fire that was here. They've made like books about things that go on in the community. They've put things in the library, like for kids to take coloring pages or word puzzles or something, so that the kids who come here as tourists might learn a little something about our town through sharing what they learned from some of these things. So, you've shared a lot of really cool stuff to pull together into units and lessons that I think would get kids excited about then sharing what they've learned.
Absolutely. Well, y'all, I thank you for your time. And if y'all have any questions, I'm here. Joe has the slide deck, and you have the links.
I've already put the link to the presentation and the resource sheet up onto the professional learning webpage. And if anybody's planning on joining the 11:30 read aloud one, I went ahead and put those up already. They sent me those ahead of time as well. So if you want to get ahead of the game on that. And then as soon as this video gets processed, it will get added to that list. So I do have all of Melissa's stuff. While we still have Melissa on the line, does anybody have any questions or any more thoughts for Melissa? I heard a lot of great discussion, a lot of things in the chat box. Don't forget to go ahead and capture that if you need that saved, or if you want any ideas out of that. Last minute thoughts or questions for Melissa?
Thank you.
Melissa, I will give you our formal thank you for giving an hour of your time and hard work and dedication and sharing your passion with Maine educators. Again, I loved the questions and discussion. I think it was a worthwhile session. So on behalf of everybody, I would like to say thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Melissa.